Hi, gay. It's Maxie, and I wanted to wish you all a happy Pride Month. For the month of June, Carolyn and I wanted to put Drag Race on the back burner and talk about the people and events that helped get us as queer people to where we are today. In this week's episode, we discuss the absolute legends Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, two trans women of color who dedicated their lives to making sure queer and trans youths were fed, housed, and heard. It's an unfortunate yet common theme of queer history that cis white queer people get to reap the benefits sown by trans people of color, while those who paved the way are left in the dust. As such, we'd like to encourage you to look into your local trans-oriented charities and organizations and donate or get involved if you can. Additionally, I'd like to highlight the Transgender Law Center, a trans-led organization dedicated to working within the legal system to protect trans people and ensure a safe future in which they can thrive. If you'd like to learn more, there's a link in the description. Stay safe, stay gay, and stay proud. Hello,
Hello.
I'm Maxie,
Hello, I'm Carolyn.
and this is Mutable Immutables, the show where we
Sure
quibble
is.
queerly.
Yeah, we sure do.
Although
what's up?
today's episode will probably not be as much quibbling as we actually have a lot of content to go through. So first and foremost, on the day of recording, this is June 4th, which means we are officially in Pride Month and Gemini season. I'm at my peak power right now.
And your birthday is next Thursday. Oh wait.
It
I
is
probably
next
shouldn't- You can cut that
Thursday.
part out. I probably shouldn't say your birthday.
No,
My
it's
bad.
okay. I don't care. Yes,
coming up.
and I am creeping closer and closer to death's door. I'm not excited about it, but what I am
I'm
excited
about
about.
6 months older than you, so watch your mouth.
Oh, like you're living for it. So we've decided that for Pride Month we're gonna use our episodes not to talk about Drag Race as much,
Fuck
and more
them
to
queens.
talk about. Well, no, no, I love them, but we just wanted to take this time to talk about queer history and I don't know, just really get focused on the whole vibe of Pride Month. I almost said brand, but we're not gonna
Oh my
talk
God.
about this in corporate capitalistic terms.
Oh
'Cause
my
fuck
God.
that.
Max has subscribed to rainbow capitalism. Repeat. Has
I
subscribed
gotta
to
say-
rainbow capitalism.
I gotta say, Target's Pride collection this year is cuter than in years past. However, I will not be partaking. Anyway, so like I said, we're not going to talk about Drag Race as much, really at all this episode. But instead, we are going to talk about probably some of the most, I would think, synonymous names and events that people think of when they think of Pride, which is Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, and the Stonewall riots, and just kind of that
For better and for worse.
era. Yeah. Which actually kind of overlaps with the Paris is Burning era, though we're not going to be talking about ballroom stuff as much. This is similar time period. In fact, I think I remember Junior LaBeija ran into Marsha P. Johnson, and she kind of like took him under her wing at one point. So anyway,
Stonewall riots happened in the summer of 1969. I don't remember the
is
time
that what
period.
Bryan Adams was singing about?
Yep. Gay activist. You never knew. He's actually singing about, well, gay stuff anyway, so, you know.
Valid.
All right.
All right. Well, without further ado,
I-
let me put down
yeah.
my giant ass iced coffee. I'm
Oh my
sitting in my bed today because my boyfriend and I both have COVID, so we're in separate spheres right now.
I would
All
like
right.
to also point out you have painted your nails a color that is not black, so congratulations.
Yes, I don't know, coming back from DragCon and then being just a couple weeks out from Pride Month, I was like really getting into the the like pride
Yes.
vibe, and
Now is the time.
yeah. So I painted my nails pink. It's actually really shitty, cheap nail polish, and it's like full
That's
of air
okay.
bubbles and shit. But whatever. Anyway, so we are going to start with probably the most famous name in terms of gay activists, and that is the one and only Marsha P. Johnson. Now, for those of you listening, I'm sure you've probably heard of Marsha P. Johnson, and you might actually know more about her than me, but we're just covering all the bases. So, Marsha P. Johnson was a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front. By the way, my notes are kind of out of order. It's not
I was
like
gonna say,
chronological.
where are we starting?
It's not chronological, and I don't feel like sorting through it all now.
We're gonna start with Stonewall, but we're gonna skip Stonewall.
Kind of, sort of.
Oh
Um,
God.
so a little bit of her background. She was a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front, which was a protest group for gay rights, an activism group. And interestingly, they named themselves that specifically, Gay Liberations Front, or GLF, because it was evocative of the Algerian National Liberation Front and the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. So they wanted their name to have like a bit more of a political punch there.
Yeah, and the National Front in UK or England.
Mm-hmm. And then also in 1970, she co-founded STAR, the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, with Sylvia Rivera. And this was a group that they were political activists, but they also really focused on protecting and housing homeless queer youths and sex workers in Manhattan.
So the reason that they created STAR in the wake of the Gay Liberation Front was created in the aftermath of Stonewall. It kind of got co-opted a little bit by kind of the white gays. They who were very much for like the assimilation into regular culture. And like, look, we're not like those drag queens. We don't party, like we don't want to be represented by them. It's the very palpable gayness.
Palatable.
Palatable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. It's a lot of respectability politics and like dress codes and kind of resentment of the fact that trans women and drag queens were going to be the ones that were photographed at these events. Because sorry, gay white men, you know, Marsha is more interesting than you are. So they resented that and tried to keep, you know, kind of keep trans people out of it and resented that coverage. And they were not in the business of liberation, and that's why STAR was created, specifically for direct action and taking care of her girls, is what, you know, you call them, her girls, and like strictly for trans women, Black trans women.
Yeah. Or just non-white trans women. Yeah. I'm glad you said the A word too, because that was a big deal. The whole idea of assimilation.
Oh.
Yeah. Because that was a big deal. At the time, it was like, yes, there was a fight for gay rights and trans rights and stuff, but there was also a fight within the community between the assimilationists, which is more your, you know, white middle class gays with privilege, versus the minority, quote unquote, of the community, which is actually more the majority, as it normally is. But I mean, it's the same story. You know, the white people get a bigger voice, and you know, so there was a lot of internal conflict within the queer community there, and there still is today. Although the idea of assimilation isn't as big as it used to be, but
yeah. So there was this demonstration 4 years later on 4 years post Stonewall on Christopher Street. And let me go ahead and say actually that I got so much of this information from this podcast I found called, actually, let me make sure I have the right website. Okay. Yeah. So it's called the Oldest Profession Podcast, and their website is oldprosonline.org. and it's a podcast basically like examining historical figures through the realm of sex work. And so they had this 3-part series on Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, but then they also hosted a panel with Dr. Charlene Fletcher, who is the historian who does a lot of the research, as well as Cheyenne Dorashaw, who was a speaker on the panel. There was also another person named Joy, I believe, and I don't remember her last name. Just want to say that I got so much of this information from them, so we'll put a link to their podcast, and I left them a little donation because I was like, this podcast is everything I've been looking for. Anyway, they had this clip of this demonstration where there was, at first there's this speaker talking about how this man had ruined her chances of being able to say anything political because he couldn't like behave himself. And she's of course referring to not a man but Sylvia Rivera. And just like the vitriol there, it was awful, and people like cheering her on. And then it's juxtaposed with this clip later of Sylvia speaking, and like the hurt and like the pain in her voice, and then people just like booing her, screaming, like literally telling her to shut up. It was so fucking sad. And that's like right before she left New York for like 20 years.
Yeah. I think
it's very specifically always been cisgender gays versus trans people, and we still see that today with, I don't even want to call them TERFs because there's nothing radical about that, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the bangs.
The JKs of the world.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to like, and I want to preface this by saying I'm not saying that we need to get complacent about anything, because obviously there's a lot more work to do. However, this whole idea of intersectionality was not as popular or as prevalent in the different liberation movements back in the day, whereas now a lot of people, especially if you call yourself a feminist or whatever, and if you go to college and talk about feminism, you're always going to talk about the intersectionality of it with racism and with homophobia and transphobia, and how all of these things intersect with each other. But at the time, it was not this big group of people who were all united for one cause. There was a lot of infighting, and there was a lot of discrimination within these different communities towards these, like, each other. And so I don't know, I'm thankful to exist in the time that I do, where that's not the issue and we can focus on other things. But like I said, that's not, I don't think we need to be complacent and say that we're done with this now, everything's good, because it's not. It's super duper not. But
real quick, I would just like to say that the term intersectional feminism, intersectionality, was first officially coined by Dr. Patricia Hill Collins in like the late 60s, early 70s, a Black feminist scholar. So I just want to point that out, that this was like an idea that was happening. But no, the fight for liberation is never over.
That's also, the fight for liberation is never over, and almost all progress that has been made can be traced to a non-white person. And that goes for not just social activism, but also just like general inventions, even industrialism, things like that. White people have always been taking things from non-white people. So that's history.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And I would also like to inject the narrative that putting Marsha Johnson on this pedestal and like treating her like a martyr kind of erases how much she actually did for the community. And I feel like it's really easy like to use a Black trans woman's face for a movement, and she was never truly taken care of by her community in her time, and Black trans women still aren't taken care of in their communities. So like, yeah, people trace a lot of our modern gay rights movement to Stonewall and Marsha and Sylvia, but that like diminishes so much work from everybody else. And, there's reasons that Stonewall got the media attention that it did that other riots, like up to a decade before that, never did.
Yeah. I also want to say, history paints people in a certain light, and oftentimes it overlooks different aspects of their lives to, like, fit the narrative that history books are trying to sell. But and I'll get to these points later in my notes too, but Marsha and Sylvia, like, they were not perfect people. They had flaws, they had issues that contributed to the work that they did. Specifically, they both were struggling with addiction at different points in their lives. They both, Marsha specifically, had some more mental stuff going on that caused her to have some more, like, violent tendencies and stuff like that. But it was these experiences that they had that gave them the ability to relate to other members of the community, and they were able to channel that into their work. But like I said, I'll get there. But we are going over this not to make them martyrs or anything, but just to, talk about queer history. So Marsha B. Johnson was at the time of her life and her work, she was a subcultural celebrity and a community figure in Greenwich Village and around Christopher Street. They even called her the mayor of Christopher Street at one point. She was also very active with the HIV and AIDS community and with ACT UP. More so in the latter part of her life, because that's when the I don't know, would you call it a pandemic, I guess? That's when the
epidemic.
Epidemic was really at its height. She also was I guess, yeah, she was largely Christian for most of her life. She would bounce around from a bunch of different, like, churches and temples and stuff. Like, she went to a couple Jewish temples, she went to some interfaith churches, she went to Catholic, Baptist, all kinds of things. Because she called it, coming in from every angle, or wanting to get every angle, which I think is cool, because a lot of times queerness and Christianity and religion, for a lot of people, are kind of mutually exclusive. But for her, she was, I don't know if she was very vocal, but I know that she said in a couple different interviews that, she's always had a really strong relationship with Jesus, and that was something that she carried with her throughout her life. Let's see. So she was born in New Jersey, but she moved to New York when she was 17 with $15 in a bag of clothes, which was not enough to get into any kind of official housing situation. So she did spend a lot of time on the streets. However, it was at that time when she started spending time with sex workers and quote unquote street queens, that she was able to have, I guess, a sort of awakening. Like, I don't think it was a surprise to her, but at that point she was able to realize that, gender, as she was told growing up, is not, that's not what gender is, and that's not what it meant for her. Same with her sexuality. And she was just really kind of able to, come into herself more. And so her first drag name was Black Marsha, but then she later changed it to Marsha P. Johnson. The Johnson part came from some restaurant on 42nd Street. But the P, do you know what the P stands for?
I don't know. Maybe, probably. Go ahead. What is it?
Stands
What's
for
the
Pay It No Mind.
Oh.
Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson.
Wait. I didn't realize that was literally her middle name.
Yeah.
Oh my God, when people called her that, I thought,
Mm-hmm.
she said that a lot. I was like, they're just calling, like how the season 14 queens on Twitter all do. I did not know that was her actual middle name. That's so funny.
Yeah, it was her middle name, and it was also her answer to the gender question. Like, whenever someone would be like, what's your gender identity? How do you identify, or whatever? Not in those terms, but she'd be like, pay it no mind. And it apparently resonated so much with people that at one point she said this to a judge. I don't know the context of the conversation. I I got most of this from Wikipedia because we don't have a lot of time and there's a lot of content, just so y'all know. Um, but she said this to a judge one time, which apparently persuaded the judge to like let her off the hook or to release her from whatever, because it was amusing to the judge. So I thought it was amusing also. Um, oh, we talked about this a little bit in when we did our Paris is Burning episode, but the terminology in the queer community has gone on a very big journey. It's changed a lot, and so a lot of the ways that people identified back then um, are not in the same terms as how people identify today.
Well, a lot
Uh,
of times, yeah, people like, I think I was reading from perhaps Billy Cooper, but a lot of times trans women would just call themselves gay
yeah,
because it was
hmm
just easier.
yeah. And this is something that's like it's a little pet peeve of mine too. Like you hear people, usually older people today, complaining about how hard it is to keep up with all the different terms and labels and things like that, and
It
how it
is.
shouldn't. And I mean, it is hard to keep up with for sure. But like, you hear people complaining about it. Like, why can't you just, why does it matter? Why does it matter so much? Because a when you can put a name to the feeling that you have inside of you, that's really validating. And B, because it's just not language and terminology that we had before. And I think it's super important that we're trying to, if you don't want to label yourself as something, fine, whatever, you don't have to. But I think it's really important that these labels exist and that they're being created so that people can kind of find a linguistic home for themselves. Um,
I would also just, we can talk about this another time, but it's a similar case of being told instead of bisexual that I'm actually pansexual, which is not true. And I know the implications, and I am attracted to transgender and non binary and gender non conforming people. I'm still not pansexual. Like,
That's a big one. Maybe we should do a whole episode on like bisexuality versus pansexuality and because I hear arguments from both sides about, it being bisexually erasure by trying to replace the term with pansexual, but then I hear that using the term bisexual instead of pansexual is like transphobic and stuff. I don't know. That's a
or
whole
hear me
can of
out.
worms.
Call yourself what you want to call yourself. Call the people close to you what they want to be called. Mind your fucking business. Pay it no mind.
Pay it no mind. Absolutely.
Um,
That being said, um Johnson and Rivera both, but I'll get to Rivera later.
yeah, you just go
Marsh,
ahead and I'll just inject some random opinions in there every once in a while.
so Marsha identified as a couple different things, like gay and like a gay man, a
Oh wait, oh my
transvestite,
gosh.
a drag queen.
Real quick, actually before you start that, I have an excerpt I would like to read
Oh,
on the
please.
history of the term gay because it was really interesting. So I have this book.
Yeah,
It's
please.
called A Steampunk's Guide to Sex by Professor
Love that.
Calamity, Alan Moore, Luna Celeste, and others. It's basically like a collection of essays, sort of. And this particular excerpt by Alan Moore is about gay New York, which I have not read, but it's an essay that was written by George Chauncey about like late 19th century, early 20th century gay New York.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Talks about how, for one thing, especially in lower class in like immigrant neighborhoods, sexuality was a lot more fluid, especially just, depending on which position you were taking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was kind of just like acceptable behavior. But so this is about let me just read. Okay, so Gay New York is brilliant, and it told me loads of stuff I was just totally aware of, like the origins of the gay practice of referring to men by women's names, talking about them as she or her, which I thought was silly but harmless affectation. The stutter jumped out. Um, no, it's not. In early New York, gay men would also often be hanging out at the automats along with other customers, and two men standing alone there talking. Oh, have you seen Violet lately? Oh yeah, I saw her the other night. Oh, you should have
Violet
seen her.
Chachki?
That's who they were talking about, exactly. Um, early 20th century Queen Violet Chachki.
I mean,
And so people listening in, though, on the conversation wouldn't have a clue that you're not talking about a woman. Loads of expressions came from that period, like the expression gay itself. Originally, it was applied to women. Gay women was a term that meant prostitute. And the thing is that some of these earliest, most visible homosexual men were prostitutes, and so they were just called gay men to distinguish themselves from gay women. Other expressions come from this too, such as she's wearing her hair up, but she sometimes drops a few hat pins. This was based upon the stereotype of gay men and gay women. Gay men and gay women as long-haired men and short-haired women. So if you're a gay man just passing as straight, it could be that you were wearing your hair up, but you might sometimes drop a few hairpins, which means drop a few hints as to your true sexuality. Also, that's where the term let your hair down just in general comes from.
Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting.
So yeah, I will report back when I have read the full essay of Gay New York, but that was just an excerpt about it by Alan Moore.
Well, and on a similar linguistic note, I know that in my past, not like recently, but when I was like a burgeoning baby gay and I was learning about the community, I never really knew the difference between like transsexual and transgender and transvestite. I kind of thought they were all the same thing because often they're used interchangeably. Yeah. However, as someone who has spent a lot of time looking at other languages and just kind of like I've always been like a language nerd.
Yes,
a good way to at least in my mind a good way to kind of separate them is transvestite has the linguistic part vest in there, which is often related to clothes. Like you think of vestido in Spanish, that means dress. You think of vêtement in French, that means clothes. And there was an S there
it's the
originally,
same thing
but the
in Latin, but I can't
circumflex
remember the
it.
exact word.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're sweet, they're actually referred to as Tim Currys.
Oh. Well,
that's a Rocky Horror joke, but you wouldn't get that.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. Fuck Rocky Horror. But I say this to say that the term transvestite is more specifically about like cross-dressing, essentially, or at least that's historically what it's been.
Yes.
People don't really say transvestite anymore because it has more negative connotations, and I'm not saying that we should resurrect it.
Yeah, I feel like you would only hear it as like a slur, I guess.
Yeah, like
these days.
Yeah, but if you come across the term transvestite in your reading, it is possible that whoever wrote it meant to say transsexual or transgender, but it is specifically about cross-dressing. Now, at the time of like in the, latter half of the 20th century, and potentially before that, I'm not 100% sure, but transsexual was the term that people more used instead of transgender, which is what we use today, where it is someone who does not identify with their assigned birth gender, and that they're more gender non-conforming in terms of whatever societal expectation gender has in that area.
I will say lots of older generations of the gays will hold fast to calling themselves transsexual and being referred to as such. That's and like in the
and
same
we're not here
way
to police that.
In the same way that older generations don't particularly love the term queer, which is a lot of young people identify as, because queer wasn't really ever used as like a slur in our generation as much, but absolutely in the older generation. Okay, well, I got others.
It's we're not here to police the terminology that people use to identify themselves because, like we've said, pay it no mind. However, times do change, language does change, and the point where we're at now, queer has been reappropriated as kind of an umbrella term for the entire community that is not cisgendered, heterosexual, anything deviant of that. Um, and yeah, so um, let's see. Speaking on the idea of gender identity, there was an article written for the Village Voice in 1979 by Edmund White, where he talked about the politics of drag. I think that was actually the name of the article.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about Marsha in this article, and said she was at once both masculine and feminine, and that was more of a gender nonconforming vibe that Johnson liked to go for. Oftentimes, when she wasn't like performing or doing activism work, it's not like she was putting on full drag all the time. It's not, I don't even know if she did hormones or anything like that. It's just, like gender's weird. Like we don't have to perform it all the time. Um, and Marsha didn't. There were times though where she did quote unquote high drag, which at the time, I don't really know if people still use like high drag and low drag as terminology or classifications, but high
Wait, what does
drag.
it mean in this context? Because like you absolutely hear people using the term high drag, but I
Okay,
don't know
maybe
if
they
it
still
means
do.
what you're
So
about. I don't hear the term low drag though.
no, I never hear low drag. I think high drag is probably still used, but it is more like, the full glamour fantasy. Like, think of like, your pageants and your like, I guess mainly that kind of thing. It's not like your, comedic performances or your little
Your
musical
bar
numbers or
queens.
whatever.
And I
Yeah,
say that term with the utmost love and respect.
it's like it's what's the expression? The whole 9 miles or whatever. It's the full fantasy. That's what high drag is.
The whole
I don't
nine
know.
yards. I think it's a
Listen,
sports thing, but I don't know. You're the sports one.
barely.
Right? The whole nine
I don't
yards.
claim that. I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's not what she spent most of her time doing. She wasn't, known as like a high drag queen. In fact, she usually would do more grassroots stuff and more comedic performances, um, with her troupe Hot Peaches, from 1972 through the
Great name.
90s. Um, yeah, I know. And then also, she worked with another troupe called the Angels of Light, which was actually an East Coast branch of the troupe, the Cockettes, which started in San Francisco.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Um,
I know the Cockettes.
let's see. Okay, now here's the little bit darker point. She was Marsha P. Johnson was known for having more of a warm and welcome persona when she was Marsha, but her quote unquote boy side, um, was often darker, angrier, and more violent, usually coming out when she was depressed or under a lot of stress, which is relatable.
She
Um,
also, and all of these people also grew up in extremely violent households
oh
as
yeah,
children,
or just
which is
on the
not to be
streets.
understated.
Hmm.
Yeah, like, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So,
We gotta get through this. I gotta shut my mouth.
I know. So because of this darker side, it unfortunately landed her in a lot of fights and in jail and sometimes even in the hospital. Particularly at times when she was having like a mental breakdown or something, she would be hospitalized and given antipsychotics, for a couple months. Um, but it was, she's credited often with starting the Stonewall riots and kind of leading those. But it was because of this darker side that a lot of people, activists who were there with her, were more hesitant to credit her for this, because there were actually several gay bars in the city that she had been banned from because of these fights and things like that. However, like I said earlier, it is these experiences that she went through, that motivated a lot of her work with, homeless and at-risk queer youth and trans people of color, that kind of thing.
Wait, they say she wasn't there at all.
Um, no, no, she was there, but a lot of more historian type people would say that she didn't actually start it.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
that's like pretty much the widely agreed upon opinion
yeah.
that it was
Um,
uh I guess, well, Stormy Delavery, I think is her name, was actually the stone butch lesbian who threw the first punch. But yeah, I think I think the agreed upon. I mean, the story is that she threw the first shot glass. She threw the shot glass. It broke the mirror. That's what started the riots. But like a lot of historians say she actually didn't show up until later because she was doing a show, or like her and Sylvia showed up the next day. But the Stonewall riots lasted for 6 days, and
Now,
so like
I also do want to say, and I simply did not have time to go down the rabbit hole with this, but the historical account, or one of the historical accounts of Stonewall, was a bit more manufactured in a lot of ways. For instance, Sylvia Rivera wasn't even there. Like, she might have shown
until
up
the
at
next
some
morning.
point. Yeah, but I there was a part that I got to where a couple of the contemporary activists had sat down with this guy named Carter, who was writing a piece about Stonewall, and they decided to include or they decided to say something along the lines of Sylvia throwing the first. I don't know. There's like, I'm
The
not
legend
discounting.
is all right. The legend is Marsha threw the first brick, shot glass, however you want to say it. Sylvia threw the first Molotov cocktail, but Sylvia will say she threw the second Molotov cocktail, and then Stormy. God, I wish I remembered how to say her last name. Delavery, I think is how you say it. Threw the first punch.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to dispute this regardless of what actually happened. So, um, yeah. Anyway, moving on. Let's see. Um, so Johnson had lived on the street for a while, engaging in survival sex. And for this, she was arrested over 100 times, and that's just for the sex work. That's not for other stuff. And she also got shot once because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometime in 1980, she was invited to stay with a friend, Randy Wicker, who I think was also a journalist. And he invited her to stay with him one night when it was like super cold. It was like 10 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And she just kind of never left. That was in 1980, and then she stayed there until she died in 1992. And it was during this time that she took care of Wicker's partner, David, who was dying from AIDS. And Johnson, who herself was also HIV positive, began focusing her energies on sitting with those who were sick and dying from AIDS and participating in a lot of activism there. And then in 1992, unfortunately, gay bashing and queer-related hate crimes were at a peak in New York, with over 1,300 reports of gay bashing that year alone. And unfortunately, Johnson was a victim of one of these attacks. Shortly after the Pride Parade in 1992, her body was found floating in the Hudson River. Her death was initially ruled a suicide, but her friends and community members said that she was not suicidal, and also pointed out there was a huge wound on the back of her head.
Yeah.
And so Marsha's friend Wicker, that she had been staying with, reported that a witness had actually seen a neighbor fighting with Johnson on July 4th, 1992, during which the neighbor used a homophobic slur and then later at a bar allegedly bragged about killing a drag queen named Marsha. The witness took this information to the police, but unsurprisingly was ignored. However, in December 2002, a police investigation resulted in the reclassification of Marsha's death from suicide to undetermined, and then I believe the case was opened again in 2014, but I couldn't find much information there.
Yeah.
So
it's a running theme throughout her life is just her giving constantly to her community and doing everything for everybody else. And like, even after she was made into like the symbol of the gay rights movement, she was still homeless, sleeping under the flower carts. Like, how dare we as a community never find who killed her? Like, that's so horrible for us to act like she's mother, she's like the pinnacle. She was not respected by her community, and we don't respect Black trans women in this way today. And I don't know, it's just the way that they're just thrown to the wayside and just taken for granted as a police casualty. The way that they were so comfortable with saying that it was a suicide.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But you got to do better.
I mean, it's tale as old as time. White people have extorted black people and used them for pretty much everything.
And
then
cisgender gays. I don't want to
yes. Yeah, no.
understate the role of just cisgender gays.
Well, I'm getting there. I was going to say that
you keep just saying white people. It's not, it's like, never mind. Go ahead.
No, that's what I'm saying. Historically, this is how it is. And, white people take the work that black people do, claim it for themselves, and discard the black people. And the gay community is no different. Because, like you said, we love in the gay community to, have all this performative reverence for Marsha P. Johnson, but not really think about the fact that, like, she literally gave her entire life to other people so that, we can enjoy some of the freedoms that we have today. And people just, like, the respect is never there. It never has been there. And it still isn't there.
Yeah, not only that, but, like, the group's actively trying to separate her and other trans women, other trans people from the community all the time. Just, there's no gay rights, there's no gay liberation without trans liberation, period.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the sooner we learn that, the better.
Yeah. Okay, so
I don't mean to be feisty, but I'm like, I get very emotional about this.
You should be. We get too comfortable, and especially at Pride Month, we like to just celebrate and be like, yeah, gay's okay, gay's great, we love gay. But
we hate the gays.
They got some issues. They
got some issues.
All right, so Sylvia Rivera, who a lot of times is talked about in tandem with Marsha P. Johnson because they were close friends for a time. Let's see. Her story is actually pretty sad throughout.
Yeah.
Not that Marsha's wasn't, but so Rivera was orphaned at a young age. Her dad left after she was born, and her mom committed suicide when she was 3. And so then she went to live with her grandmother, who I believe was from Venezuela. But then she only stayed there until she was 10, and then she left because she was a very effeminate child, and her grandmother was very devoutly religious and did not approve of this. And so it didn't say whether she was kicked out or whether she left, but right before her 11th birthday, she was living on the streets, which 10 fucking
10 years old.
And then even worse, in 1962, which is when she started living on the streets, she started working as a child prostitute, which I just can't even. And then she was taken in by a group of drag queens who gave her the name Sylvia. She became an activist around 1970 with the Gay Liberation Front, specifically the Drag Queen Caucus, and then joined the gay. That. Well, yeah, but
Stonewall.
Joined the Gay Activists Alliance at 18, fighting not only for gay people, but specifically for the inclusion of drag queens like herself in the movement. Now, it's important to say, first of all, most of Sylvia Rivera's work was very specifically trans-oriented and non-white oriented. But also, drag queens were not always as accepted and celebrated as they are today. And in fact, they were kept separate from gay men in a lot of circles. Like, Stonewall itself used to be a gay men only bar, like no women, not even drag queens.
Yeah, it was like a very white, like middle class, like upstanding, assimilated citizens bar. Like no trans women, no drag queens,
and
no
so
gender nonconformity, and they
Sylvia
would do like
Rivera's
checks.
Yeah, it was actually pretty fucked. And Sylvia Rivera's like whole deal throughout her whole life was anti-assimilation and focusing on these more vulnerable voices and getting them into these circles, not because she wanted them to be assimilated, but because she wanted everyone in the community to be accepted and celebrated, not just this one specific type, which unfortunately still a big part of the conversation today. But so let's see. Marsha P. Johnson was kind of an older and more protective friend of Rivera's at first, and then they got very close and founded Star together in 1970.
This was when I think at this time Sylvia was 18 and Marsha was like 24.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
something
that sounds
about
right.
that age difference.
Let's see. So Star was not just about protecting and housing queer homeless youth and at-risk youth. They also did political work as well, including fighting for the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, or SONDA, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation in employment, housing, public accommodations, education, credit, and the exercise of civil rights, which is, you see that stuff a lot of time when you're signing like job contracts and stuff like that. Very much same thing. Let's see.
In 1969, there was this political group called FREE created, and it stood for Fight Repression of Erotic Expression.
There you go.
They're from
Sexual freedom.
Minneapolis. Yeah.
So, as I said before, as much as we love these two, there are imperfections in their past, one of which is Sylvia Rivera was often known to kind of over-exaggerate the role that she played in certain things. Again, I'm reading this from Wikipedia. I did not have time to go down a full rabbit hole. But let's see. Johnson
who among us?
Yeah, we all like to be important.
That's why there's a first shot glass, a first Molotov cocktail, and a first punch.
Yep. Let's see. Rivera was known to exaggerate her importance, claiming to have been active during the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War protests, second wave feminism, and active with the Young Lords and Black Panthers, though these claims have never actually been proven, which isn't necessarily saying anything, but
Yeah, no, she definitely worked with like the Young Lords and like Huey Newton and like those radical organizations.
Yeah,
it's hard to see the source they're citing there.
It's hard to tell. That's another thing. I didn't go through the sources, but it's hard to tell, is this someone who's just trying to quell another trans POC voice, or...
Right. I would love to say that Wikipedia is generally a good source, but especially in these cases, we have to be very wary of what they're saying.
I was actually thinking about when I was going through this, because, they browbeat you so hard in, like, elementary and middle school, like, Wikipedia is not a reputable source. But it's like... the same people who are telling us that, I mean, first of all, a lot of times it is pretty good and very well cited. But a lot of times these are the same people who will turn around and like mistake an Onion article for like being true, so like
in their defense these days, satire, it's hard.
It's crazy. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Sylvia also alleged to have been instrumental in the Stonewall riots, going as far as to say that she started the riots, but this has been disputed based on contradictory statements made by Rivera herself and testimony from Johnson and other contemporary activists that Rivera wasn't even there. This is where it gets tricky too, because like you said, the Stonewall riots were over the course of like 6 days.
That's what I'm saying. Like, why does it matter if she showed up the next day? That doesn't mean she wasn't at the
It doesn't.
riots.
Like, but
it also doesn't mean that she didn't do incredible like community direct action work before that, and is why she was part of the iconography.
It doesn't erase any of that. However, it was a point of contention between the two of them and led to a sort of falling out, which I'll get to in just a minute. It was agreed by Rivera and other activists that she should be included in the historical records so that young Puerto Rican transgender kids had someone to look up to. This was the piece that I was talking about where they had like met with some historian or whatever who was going over the events, and they were like, yeah, just say that, like, we'll say that you threw the Molotov cocktail or whatever. Again, doesn't really matter. She did a lot of incredible work, but in 1973 it did cause her and Marsha to have a falling out. So In 1973, on the 4-year anniversary of the riots, Rivera gave her gay power speech.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
the speech I
later,
was talking about earlier. I
oh yeah,
think. I think that's the same speech I was talking about.
um, later in the rally, a feminist activist named Jean O'Leary was giving a speech that was allegedly more critical towards drag queens.
Okay,
Although,
that's the other speech. Okay, yeah, that's the other speech I was talking about, I think. Is this the Christopher Street demonstration? Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, hmm
Okay, yeah.
um, and this, not that it matters, but Jean O'Leary, this feminist, later said that she was regretful of the tone of her speech and that that
Good, because you should honestly listen to that shit. It was vile.
I didn't look up the speeches. I meant to, and then ran out of time,
I'm just
honestly.
speaking to the general you of the world.
um let's see. So because of this speech that was more critical towards drag queens, it kind of incensed Sylvia Rivera and another queen, Lee Brewster, into jumping on stage to confront her. And then Rivera said something along the lines of, "Y'all better quiet down. You go to bars because of what drag queens did for you, and these bitches tell us to quit being ourselves."
Yep.
And then she talked about heterosexual males preying on the vulnerable members of the community, and noted that queer prisoners who were seeking help don't write to men or women at large. They write
Yep.
to Star specifically.
Yep.
However, after this, Rivera was backstage talking about having been at Stonewall when Marsha P. Johnson allegedly confronted her, saying that she wasn't even there. And then after this confrontation, Rivera left Manhattan and moved to Tarrytown, New York with her partner, where she stayed for the next 20 years. So, like we said, it doesn't. She did a lot of incredible work, and later in her life, she also continued to do incredible work. But I only bring up the whole controversy of her not being at Stonewall or whatever, um, because it was a
It was
pretty
a
big deal
catalyst
to
for
Marsha,
like,
apparently, to
yeah.
confront her about it and then cause Rivera to leave town. Um, so let's see. She did not come back to Manhattan until 1992. After Marsha's death, she got a telegram about Marsha's death, and that's what caused her to move back. She did not have a house to move back to. She was homeless, but she mainly stayed on the Christopher Street gay piers. Um, and at this point, because of her past with homelessness and drug addiction and suicidal thoughts, ideations, and attempts, Rivera focused her activism more on helping those with similar experiences and backgrounds. She was committed to giving a voice and a platform to the more vulnerable members of the community, specifically the queer, poor, homeless youth, queer inmates, queer people of color, and trans people, which her definition at the time included drag queens and butch dykes. Um, she went to Italy for the Millennium March slash World Pride in 2000, which I think was in Rome, um, and was even heralded as the mother of all gay people, which is not something that I had heard before. In 2001, she resurrected Star, but changed the T from transvestite to transgender to make it more inclusive. Because at that time, transgender was more of an umbrella term. We talked about that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not only did Starr fight for different legislation like SONDA and the New York City Transgender Rights Bill, but Rivera also used this platform to go after the Human Rights Campaign, which is still pretty active today, and the Empire State Pride agenda for standing in the way of transgender rights. And in fact, on her deathbed, she even met with representatives from the Empire State Pride agenda to outline transgender inclusion in their efforts. So this was a very big deal to her, as it should have been. And I want to say we're all better for it, but and maybe we are comparatively speaking, but trans death rates are still way too high. Let's see.
I think we as relatively privileged white cisgender gays are better off for it. I don't know if trans people are better off necessarily because of the way that we still disregard them in the movement.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I would also like to point out that the early provocateurs of the movement are all like people who were HIV positive, sex workers,
Mm-hmm.
trans, poor, homeless, from volatile homes. And these are the people who have like nothing left to lose except like themselves. And like I think that's a quote from the podcast. It was just like resistance is born from those who have nothing to lose, and that's very true. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I want to be so particular that like cisgender gays were absolutely like uh um an outer saboteur to the trans community at this time. It wasn't all just like
Mm-hmm.
holding hands at Stonewall. Like, no.
No, there was infighting. There was a lot of discord. Yeah. Um, which, again, I think it's important that we recognize the progress that has been made, but I also think it's important that we remember it was not this pretty rainbow time of peace and harmony back then. Like there was a lot that had to happen for us to even get where we are today.
Basically, like the gay community, like the trans community, the sex work community, which I think they referred to themselves as hustlers back in the day, but it's all
Mm-hmm.
kind of intertwined because they're all in there together. um they're all running from the police, they're all running from like the establishment, and so it's kind of that's why like gay culture even now gets so intertwined with sex works because,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the quote was like natural alliances of the underground was the quote that I read.
Well, because you
And
had to
that's like kind of,
survive.
well, yeah, and then that's why like chosen family is like
Mm-hmm.
the founding principle of like gay pride.
Yeah.
Is because like they literally had to find a family because their own kicked them out at 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's it's just important to be like, especially in these trying times. I know that things have been very hard for a lot of people, but for the people out there like myself who, may have their own struggles, but who also benefit from large amounts of privilege, it's important to be respectful of history and thankful of where we are now, and then to use that privilege and, to go forward and try to make things better for the future generations. Um. Okay. Almost done with Sylvia Rivera. Um. She spent the latter few years of her life, like the last 5 or so years, mainly just being angry, because the importance of drag queens and trans people, had kind of faded into the background because the new generation of gay leaders, was more focused on things like Don't Ask, Don't Tell and marriage equality. And this is just, something that happens. People get older, the focus shifts, younger generations take on the torch. And instead of taking the work that these trans activists had done and using that, it kind of went back to a more assimilationist type of vibe, and they just kind of like, I don't want to say forgot about, but essentially just forgot about
No, forgot
Sylvia.
about.
Yeah. um let's see. This anger that Rivera felt eventually got her banned from the New York Gay and Lesbian Center in the mid 90s, because she showed up on a cold winter night and aggressively demanded that the center take in poor and homeless queer youth, and they refused her. And so she had a vendetta against these assimilationist organizations because she felt they weren't doing enough and they were choosing to ignore the most vulnerable members of the community. And even today, Rivera's Latina Puerto Rican identity is often erased by both history books and part of the Latina community. Um, like Marsha P. Johnson, Rivera also distinguished between transvestite and her own gender identity, calling herself a half sister, which is something she defined as people with the minds of women trapped in male bodies, which is what today we would probably just call a transgender woman. But like Johnson, her gender identity was more fluid, and she would call herself a gay man, a half sister, a gay girl, and a drag queen or a street queen. And she notably, and kind of explicitly said that none of these identities were mutually exclusive. They were all parts of the same whole, and that whole was her. Like they were all of her identities. That's another thing. I think a lot of people, especially today, with all the different labels that we have, are so focused on trying to fit into one instead of being like, well, you know, today maybe I'm more boy, but
It also
yesterday
just
I was
doesn't
more girl.
fucking matter. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, you are who you are.
Just do what you want.
Accept it and celebrate it. Yeah. Um, she did take hormones, but it was only towards the end of her life, and she never got any gender affirming surgeries because she was more comfortable with the fluidity of her own gender. And then on February 19th, 2002, she died of liver cancer. And she is sometimes remembered as the Rosa Parks of the transgender movement,
Yeah.
which I feel like is kind of a loaded thing to say. And as a white person, I'm not going to analyze that. But anyway.
Tend to try not to make comparisons like that, but I have also heard her or read her compared to that. I do think we should real quick just talk about what actually happened at Stonewall, because
Yes.
there's a very like whitewashed version of what happened. So the Stonewall Inn was owned by the mafia. Okay, which
Have you ever been there, by the way?
No, I've never been to. Oh, yes, I have been to New York. No, I've never been to the Stonewall.
I went to Stonewall once. The last time I was in New York, I went with a couple other queer friends, and then we saw this like gay history exhibit in, I don't remember. I think it was the public library, actually. I don't remember for sure. But like it was I actually got like, I mean, full disclosure, as we all know, I am like a white gay, not cis, but white. And a lot of times it's easy for me to say like, this is my community, when famously white people have done nothing to actually be a part of that community. However, being there and like being at the exhibit and being at Stonewall, and just like, because at the exhibit they had pieces of the history and they talked about the people that had died for this kind of thing, and I was like, I actually started to tear up a little bit. I was like, wow, this is like, I don't know, it's a lot. Because like I spent a lot of time knowing that I was part of this big community, but not really like tangibly like feeling that. Yeah, until I got there, and I was like, this is a whole lot bigger than me, and there's like just so many other people that have been in this position and part of this community and had similar and far worse struggles, that it just, I don't know, I'm not a super emotional person, but it like definitely made me feel things.
As we are well aware, like 20th century counterculture is kind of like my wheelhouse, and so I just tend to know a lot about this. But young me, will come as no surprise, was very interested in the gay rights movement. I wonder why that was so weird.
Why.
What a random interest.
How quirky.
But like, not really having my own gay community, same deal. It's like you don't feel it until you're in the presence. So anyway, Stonewall, because it's juicy. So Stonewall was run by the mafia. Oftentimes, the way that gay bars were kept out is they just wouldn't be granted a liquor license. Interestingly enough, that's how back in the 30s they kept a lot of black jazz artists out, is not granting them their cabaret license to be able to sing in bars. Most notably Billie Holiday, which eventually that ended her career and led to her death. So anyway, gay bars weren't granted their liquor license a lot of times, but Stonewall was owned and run by the mafia, and so they would pay off the 6th Precinct. And basically the deal was, and we know that like this like 60s, 70s, 80s New York is not the New York we know today.
No.
Like, New York at that time was probably like one of the most dangerous places in the country to live. It was
rough. Yeah.
So the deal was that the cops would come every once in a while, get a payout. They would arrest these kind of sacrificial lambs as kind of like a show, but then they would like, let them go, and like the embarrassment of being like outed at a gay bar would be enough for most of these people, and then everybody goes home happy, except for the fact that the trans women and the drag queens didn't let go. They just got fully arrested and thrown in jail. The law was that you had to be wearing 3 pieces of gender conforming
Yeah.
clothing at all times, and
Mhm.
socks don't count. Um, Iggy Pop of the Stooges was arrested under this law, just for wearing dresses in public. He's a cis man as far as we know, but uh,
Well,
transphobia
and
and
those clothing laws go back a while too. Like I think into the 1800s, right?
yeah, transphobia affects every single one of us. Um, Anyway, so like if you were cis or you like kind of passed as a woman, like you were enough to be a stealth. I think that they were called like woodwork back in the day instead of stealth, which is when you like are stealthily trans, like you don't tell people you're trans, you just pass. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so if you were like cis or passing, you were basically like gone with the like just the punishment of a little like humiliation, just roughing up. But like oftentimes
Right.
like the gender non-conforming, the sex workers, the drag queens were just thrown in jail. So this is the history like leading up to the Stonewall riots. It didn't just come out of nowhere. um so from my understanding and my memory, which has been burned to a crisp by years of debauchery, um what I believe happened was it was one night they showed up at like 1 in the morning. So like fuck ton of people there. It's poppin'. Also apparently like the way it was situated is like in a neighborhood that just has like a ton of like alleys and crossroads. So like you can get there from anywhere kind of thing. It's again, I don't know anything about New York geography, but that's what it sounds like. Um so my understanding is the cops showed up. There's a huge fucking line for the genital checks because, yes, recent
God.
history. Um, Depending on who you ask, Marsha threw a shot glass at the mirror or Stormy DeLavery or some. She and some people say it was her. Other people say it was another lesbian. Threw a punch at the cop and escaped the back of a cop car. Either way, the riot broke out. Cops realized, oh, there's only 4 of us. We're outnumbered. The cowards barricaded themselves inside the bar with a journalist. So that's why this got press like other ones didn't get press, because it was a white gay bar. It was a riot at a white gay bar, and they had the journalist there. Um,
Well,
so
and then
this
didn't
was
they call in like they
they called
didn't they
in the
call in
SWAT team. They called in the
yeah.
fucking like National Guard. For,
Yeah.
like, um,
Which is what they still do today, by the way, because it
oh,
works so
totally.
well.
Um, but yeah, no, it was 6 nights of riots. 6 nights of resistance. Yeah, I don't even want to call it a riot. Like 6 nights of uprising, 6 nights of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Actually, I don't know how it ended. Damn. I actually took very good notes this time, and I forgot to write how it officially ended. Um, Point is, after that, the Gay Liberation Front was added. There was a large segmenting just within the first couple years of, again, people who did not want trans people to be a part of the community, and trans people and supporters, of course. So out of that, we get Star. And out of that, we get organizations like House of Gigi and like all these organizations specifically designed to make sure that trans people are housed and healthy and safe. And that is the legacy that we should carry on from Stonewall.
It is just absolutely insane to me that it has been such like a fight and such a like decades long effort just to get trans people into houses. You know what I mean? Like obviously this isn't the story of all non-cis people, but like the fact that so many of them still have to worry about something as basic as just like not living on the street for being the person they are is
Yeah.
like what the fuck are we doing? Why are we still here?
I mean, we act like the job discrimination doesn't exist. Like,
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, no, these.
No, like we impose these laws and we impose these restrictions and legislation and whatever, but the people in power who do not want these vulnerable people in their spaces will find ways around it. Like you think of like, the grandfather clause, or like what you said with the liquor license thing. Like there are ways to discriminate extra legally
Legally, exact. No, I'd
that
say.
like
Wait, actually, I don't really have a full understanding of what that means, but I mean, like, fully through the law. I think that's what extra legally means. I don't know if extra means out or like.
oh yeah, so
What
basically
were
what I
you
meant to
saying?
say is what I meant to say is like they are not they are not violating these laws
Exactly,
explicitly,
because
but
the laws are created.
they're still violating the laws. You know what I mean?
No, they're not violating the laws because the laws were not made with liberation in mind.
No, but what
So
I'm
the
saying, like the liquor license thing, for example, it's like that discrimination is still happening. It's just happening in a different way that
oh
is
yeah,
not covered by the law. That's more or less what I mean. But
nice. I would also like to shout out a couple more people because one of the things about just like having one nice neat symbol for a movement is that we forget about other people who were both there and did important work leading up to the gay well, the start. Stonewall is usually thought of as a start, but of course.
oh
Anyway,
yeah,
so
no.
I would like to shout out Miss Major Griffin Grayson. She is a showgirl. She's still alive. She's a prison reform advocate, and she was one of she, for one thing, was misgendered and thrown in a male's prison in Attica and survived. And she was one of the main negotiators in, I think, 1971 is when it was, Attica prison riots. As well as Stormy Delavery, self-appointed. I know I keep bringing her up. She's just fucking cool. Self-appointed guardian of the lesbians. They described her
Nice.
as tall, androgynous, and armed. And she would just walk around the neighborhoods and check on all the lesbian bars as a legal gun owner, and just people feared and revered her.
Do you know what that
Um,
makes me think of for some reason?
huh.
You just said like tall androgynous protector of lesbians. It made me think of Tammy.
Oh my god, our
Can you
old boss.
imagine just walking around with a gun being like, y'all doing
Jesus
lesbian stuff?
Christ.
Okay, good.
Okay, good. Um, anyway, so Sharon Grayson, also trans. I think she used to be a burlesque performer. She helped Miss Major get the House of Gigi up and running off the ground. She got them their like legal nonprofit status. I don't know all that terminology.
Hmm.
Um, she's very quiet, but she's still alive. She apparently she's very like understated, which makes sense because I couldn't really find a ton about her. But and then there's also Billy Cooper, who is still alive and active in uh, San Francisco politically. She ran for some kind of public office last year. I don't know if she won it, but she's in the same little precinct area as none other than season 5 of Drag Race's Honey Mahogany, who also holds public office.
I did not know Honey Mahogany held a public office.
Actually, I think she's like a pub. Let me look it up real quick. She definitely ran for office, and she holds some. I think she's a legal aid or something.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to say
Don't know.
put drag queens in charge, but then another part of me is like, wait, because like
Okay, yeah,
Gia
she was an.
Gunn and like
I know. She was an aide to District 6 Supervisor Matt Haney, and
okay.
then ran for office, but I don't think she ever won the position.
Well, and like
But
Jackie
anyway,
Cox is really active politically too, right?
I believe so. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think so. She's cool. I don't know. If you want to look up other riots that happened in the same vein as Stonewall, you can look into the Compton Cafeteria riot is probably the most famous other one. It happened in San Francisco in 1966. And the cafeteria closed, and this was, of course, another police brutality raid where the police initially lied to the media until it was proven that they were actually lying, and they were like, oh, haha, oops. Anyway, San Francisco, 1966. There was Cooper's Donuts in Los Angeles, and that was all the way in 1959. There was the
wow.
Black Cat in 1967, Los Angeles. I talked earlier about Free in Minneapolis. That started in 1969. In Milwaukee, there was another similar case of police brutality at the Black Knight, I think was the name of it. So just look into these little incidents because they don't come out of nowhere, and you might even find that history repeats itself, and you may find some similar things.
I mean, we're very much living in a time that will be in history textbooks for sure, which is why I think it's so important to remember these kinds of events and these riots and the social atmosphere of the time, and think about the fact that like this was, God, how many years ago was it? Like 50 years ago, and this shit is still happening, and it's like there's a duty that we have to carry that fight on. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying like go out and just punch a cop, but like, you know,
Long
I'm not.
silence.
Yeah,
For legal reasons, we don't condone violence, but also for personal reasons, state violence is worse than any individual could ever, ever, ever do.
correct. Yep. I was actually just looking through my time hop earlier today, and 2 years ago is when we were at the height of the George Floyd protests, and it's like that energy and that passion for activism is still out there, and like the state violence is absolutely still out there. I mean, just
it's almost just
with,
like everything's expensive and wages are low, so that we don't have the time or energy or bandwidth to organize as a community.
yeah,
Not to be a conspiracy theorist here, but
no, it's not a conspiracy though. The government is using everything
for
they
legal
have at
reasons,
this point.
this is a joke.
This is a joke. Ha ha ha. It's funny. I think it's so funny that the government is suppressing its people and keeping them from uprising and fighting for better conditions for themselves and their neighbors. Ha 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 ha. So we got to wrap it up.
This is a comedy podcast. Sorry.
This is a comedy podcast. So we got to wrap it up. But happy Pride Month, everyone. Remember why we're here. Remember what the fight is about. Remember all of the members of the community have the same power to their voice, and don't ignore your neighbor, like, anyway,
community
real quick,
support is a hell of a lot more effective than a lot of things you can do.
And also, no, I'm not gonna say that, never mind. What are you into?
Oh shit. Okay. I watched a couple movies. I watched Pink Flamingos.
Oh, okay.
It was great.
Nice.
The scene that you hear about was, terrible. There were also some other scenes you don't hear about that were fucking terrible. But at least I can say I've watched it. I finally finished reading this book called England's Dreaming by John Savage or something. It's essentially a textbook. It's 600 pages.
Oh my God.
It's considered the source on England punk. It's technically about the Sex Pistols. It was long and very boring at some points because I had to learn about British 20th century history, which I don't know anything about. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so I finished reading that fucking finally. I finished reading Love, Sex, Music by Cozy Fanny Tootie, who was, above all, an artist. Also, I don't know the proper sex worker, I guess, but, she never really referred to herself as that. But anyway, and then she was also, in the band Throbbing Gristle, which is, totally not my style. Do not care about them, but they're very interesting.
Love that name, though.
Fucking hate that name. Oh my God.
Really?
She referred to them as TG for the whole book because it's just
Throbbing
vulgar.
Gristle.
Throbbing
I love
Gristle. So that was very interesting. Let's see, I watched Pink Flamingos. I watched Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Another classic.
Nice.
Yeah, that's what I'm into. What are you into?
What am I into? So I have been at home in bed this whole past week because of
Oh yeah.
COVID. So I've watched a lot of TV. First and foremost, I would like to say I'm very into not having COVID because it sucked. Um, but I was able to um, watch a lot of TV. So I watched Stranger Things 4.
Oh,
Very
nice.
good. Um, Very into it. I also watched this show called Sweet Tooth, which I think came out last year. Um, it is it hit a little bit close to home because there was like this pandemic virus that like shut down the world and turned it into this like apocalypse type situation. But then these like animal hybrid babies started being born. Um, and it's like connected to the virus somehow. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did. Like I kind of just half-heartedly put it on. I was like, well, just check it out,
Yeah.
kind of fantasy, whatever. It's actually very good. It's based on comics from the DC universe, which I never really, I say never really, straight up never read. Um, but it's very good, and the end of season 1 left me wanting like a lot more. And there's more coming,
Nice.
um, so I'm into that. Also into the show Ragnarok. It is this Norwegian show about Norse mythology in kind of a more modern context. It's pretty good. Um, what else? Oh, I shaved my legs. Um,
Your tweets about that, I was like, oh, honey.
so I was mystified because I like, first of all, it took me a very long time because I have naturally pretty hairy legs and I've never once in my life shaved them before. And so I took maybe like 45 minutes and like took my little electric razor, whatever, shaved all the long hair off, and then I like took a bath and then very slowly and methodically did the rest of it. Um, I'm a contortionist now because of it.
Yep.
And it went so well the first time. Like I was totally smooth, no razor burn. I got everything. It was totally fine. And then I tried to do it again. And then it was rough because then I started cutting myself and I was like, okay,
Mm,
let me just try Nair. So then I got Nair. Didn't
didn't
work as
work.
well either because I had to use the whole bottle, but I couldn't get it thick enough for it to really be effective. So then I had to shave my legs again. And now I just have razor bumps everywhere, but whatever.
Oh,
Um,
man.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and then
That sucks.
last thing, do you remember that game Flow from like years and years ago? It's like
No,
it was kind of like a connect the dots type thing. Okay, well,
I don't
I've been playing that nonstop this week, and I
Nice.
looked at my screen time. I've been averaging 8 hours a day on that fucking game.
Oh
There
my
was
god,
one
it's a
day,
full-time job.
there was one
You
day
should
where I
start
straight up played
streaming
it
on
for
Twitch.
10 hours.
Oh my god,
It's
you're fucking
insane.
crazy. That's insane.
Anyway,
Um,
um,
real quick because you said Ragnarok and it just reminded me. I'm going to see fucking Guar tomorrow.
oh, tomorrow I
I
saw your
am
Instagram story about it, but
so goddamn excited. For those of you who don't know, Guar is a metal band from the 1980s made up of a group of aliens from the planet Scumdogs. Scumdogia. I don't fucking know. But I don't know. It's these they wear enormous like costumes, big drag, and like will have like four dicks. And then they're like
Carolyn's about
acting
to have the
out
time of her fucking
they're
life.
acting out like chopping off politician's head, and there's a
Oh
big
yeah.
dick on stage that spews semen, but it's not actually semen, it's like water. And then also dyed food coloring water, like spurting blood. But also they make fucking incredible music. It's not just a gimmick, they make good music, and that's why I'm going to see them even though none of the original members are still alive. Rock and roll, baby. It literally says on the thing, don't wear clothes you don't want ruined.
Hell yeah. That's your whole vibe.
I'm so excited.
You're gonna have such a good time.
All right, that's all.
Have we quibbled?
Oh, queerly.
Oh yeah. Super
Clearly,
clearly.
queerly.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Those of you that have. I should say thank you, folks. Actually,
I
I'm
was
trying to degender my language.
I
I'm
was gonna
sorry.
say that. Oh my
um,
god.
so thank you everyone to listen for those of you that have. If you want to keep up with us, which I do suggest, you can follow us on Instagram at Mutable Immutables. You can follow us on Twitter at Immutables Pod. You can find us on YouTube at Mutable Immutables, and you can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, and maybe wherever else. I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Google it.
Google it.
Somewhere.
We're in the ether. Yeah, we're just queerly vibing, quivering. All right. Well,
Don't love that. Okay. Bye.
that's all, folks. Bye.
That's all she wrote.